Welcome. My name is Yanjun, and this is a pre-recorded presentation for the 2022 meeting of the Society for Mathematical Psychology about our work on the impact of experience on preference formation and context effects in multi-alternative multi-attribute choice. The decisions we make throughout our daily lives rely on different types of preferences. For instance, imagine that you are selecting the restaurants in a food court. When you encounter choices that you have substantial dining experience with, your restaurant choice may mainly rely on inherent preferences, which are regarded as stable dispositions that are robust to decision contexts and tend to form with experience. In contrast, when you encounter options that you have never explored before, you are unlikely to have enduring preferences for restaurants, and thus you may gravitate toward constructing your preferences by comparing the restaurants to some reference point. The constructed preferences are malleable to decision contexts and tend to emerge when existing preferences are ambiguous. Given its nature of context dependency, constructed preferences are believed to play an essential role in the emergence of context effects. When making choices among multiple options based on multiple attributes, context effects refer to the change in preferences for existing options when the choice sets include additional options. Previous studies about context effects put strong emphasis on the construction of preferences and usually neglect the impact of preferences that could be learned from prior experience. Empirically, the sets of options used in past studies tend to stack the deck against inherent preferences. For instance, many studies use options that were novel to decision makers and decision scenarios with low external validity, both of which make it hard for decision makers to access their inherent preferences. Theoretically, many cognitive models of context effects assume preferences options are constructed over time for granted. In the current study, we aim to examine the impact of inherent preferences learned from experience of options on the emergence of context effects. We are interested in answering the questions that when enduring preferences are accessible, whether context effects can still emerge, and if so, what is the role that the experience plays in the emergence of context effects? To answer these questions, we recruited 400 participants from MathPsych and asked them to make a series of multi-alternative multi-attribute choices where they had the opportunity to experience the options of their choices. The options we used are simple counting jobs, and the two key attributes are the number of items for counting within a task and the number of tasks to complete within a job. Such options should have high external validity to our participants because these choices are similar to the decisions MathPsych workers often make, among which hits to select to complete. There are 7 types of options used. The focal options X and Y have the same total number of items for counting. The attraction decoys Rx and Ry are inferior to their corresponding target options on the disadvantage attribute. The compromise decoys Cx and Cy are selected to ensure that the corresponding target option locates in between the decoy and the competitor on the indifferent curve. The symmetric decoy is inferior to focal options on both attributes. 4 types of choice sets are used. The binary choice sets and the ternary choice sets, including the symmetric decoy in addition, are used to measure the change of preferences for options. The choice sets including attraction and the compromise context decoys are used to assess the emergence of context effects. In this study, we focus on these 2 effects because they are frequently observed to co-occur and likely involve similar cognitive mechanisms. Our paradigm presents the attribute values of options in a description-based format. Thus, participants need only learn their preferences for various options from experience, rather than the objective values of those options. To assess the robustness of our findings, we run 2 experiments with the option-wise and the attribute-wise display layouts, respectively. Within each experiment, there are 2 types of blocks. In the choice counting block, participants were asked to complete the tasks they selected after making a choice, whereas in the choice-only block, participants did not need to complete any counting jobs of their choices. These 2 blocks were arranged in different orders. In the condition of choice counting to choice-only blocks, that is CC to choice, participants were asked to complete the choice counting block before proceeding to the choice-only block, whereas in the condition of choice-only to choice counting block, that is choice to CC, they were asked to complete the choice-only block first, then the choice counting block. Participants were randomly assigned to one of the block order conditions at the beginning of the experiment. We expect that when participants have little or no experience with the options, for instance in the choice-only block of the choice to CC condition, the influence of constructed preference would play a dominant role in their decisions, since the inherent preferences are unlikely to form. Thus, the emergence of context effects is expected. When participants can learn their preference from experience, we expect that the inherent preferences would form. If inherent preferences do reduce relative evaluations, then we expect that experience with selected options may lead to the attenuation of context effects. As expected, our results show a clear formation of preferences with experience of the options. In both experiments, when participants shifted from the choice-only to the choice-counting block, their preferences between focal options changed from a neutral state to favoring the job with fewer tasks. For those who started with the choice-counting block, the preference for the job with fewer tasks was formed with experience, and such a preference remained when they shifted to the choice-only block. We measure the emergence of context effects with change in the choice proportions of target options, estimated from the choice set when it includes its corresponding context decoy and when it includes its competitor's decoy. A positive change indicates emergence of the standard context effects. That is, the inclusion of the context decoy increases the preference for the target option, whereas a negative change indicates a reversed context effect. Zero change reflects that the inclusion of the context decoys does not affect preference for the focal options, thus there is no emergence of context effect. To our surprise, our results show consistent emergence of reversed compromise effect even when participants had the opportunity to experience the selected options. This indicates that even when stable preferences are accessible, the decision process could still be dominated by relative evaluations. Moreover, with experience of the selected options, the effect is observed to be stronger on the preferred focal options, that is, the one with fewer number of tasks, than on the less favored one. Similar patterns of the change in choice proportions of the target options have been observed in the attraction choice sets, suggesting consistent emergence of the reversed attraction effect regardless of the experience of the selected options, and the asymmetrical strength of the effect on different focal options. Again, the preferred focal options has been observed to be affected by the attraction decoy more than the less favored one. In summary, our empirical results show that when preferences for the focal options were ambiguous, context effects emerged as expected. Yet when inherent preferences formed with the experience of options, context effects still appeared. Moreover, The context effects were stronger on the preferred focal option. These findings raise a question of what are participants learning from the experience in our task. We propose that participants might be learning attribute-specific preferences corresponding to attribute weight parameters in computational models of context effects. Most computational models of context effects incorporate attribute or attention weights that reflect the subjective importance of different attributes. For instance, in the multi-attribute linear ballistic accumulator model, different options are represented by independent accumulators that race towards a decision threshold. The accumulator reaching the threshold first results in a choice of a corresponding option. The rate of preference accumulation in MLBA models depends on the characteristics of the options. The drift rate for a particular option is a weighted sum of pairwise comparisons between that option and the other options, which captures the relative evaluations of preference constructions. The weights on the pairwise comparisons are defined in terms of the similarity of options being compared. They are governed by two elements. Beta, representing the attribute weights, captures the attribute-specific preferences, as one attribute can factor more strongly than the other. Lambda governs the sensitivity to positive and negative attribute differences. Now, if experience does lead to the formation of experience for specific attributes, it does not necessarily alter the relative comparisons among options. Therefore, the model predicts that context effects can still emerge. To test this hypothesis, we run model simulations with MLBA models using the same attribute values employed in our experiments. Our results show that when the attributes weighed equally in the deliberation course, the simulated choice proportions from the binary set reflect ambiguous preferences between focal options, and the attraction and compromise effects emerged with the symmetrical strengths on the focal options. When bias toward attribute 2 was introduced into the model, a clear preference for the focal option with advantage on the preferred attribute is observed. Context effects still emerged, but the strengths of the context effects were asymmetrical. Moreover, if the sensitivity to the advantageous comparisons was relatively stronger than to the disadvantaged comparisons, the simulated context effects were stronger for the preferred focal option, which qualitatively reflected the empirical results. Our study documents that the constructed preferences could still play a dominated role in decisions on multi-alternative multi-attribute choices, while enduring preferences learned from experience might exist. The experience of selected options could result in attribute-specific preferences, which not necessarily alters the relative evaluations, but could impact how context effects emerge. Thank you for your attention so far. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or comments, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.